Welcome to my Bard story.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Glad you could join us for another deep dive.
Yes, welcome.
Today, we're stepping into, well, a really fascinating passage, but one that's also quite challenging, I think. It's Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 to 28.
Right, the story of Noah and his sons right after the flood.
Exactly. And, at first glance, it might just look like maybe a simple family drama. Bit awkward, perhaps. But as we dig into it today, drawing from our notes and insights from various scholars, we'll see it's just packed with really profound theological implications.
And some surprising parallels, too, right, to earlier parts of Genesis.
Absolutely. Parallels, prophetic insights, things that kind of ripple through all of human history, even, you could argue, right up to our present day.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's turn to our notes then, starting with Genesis 9, verse 18. This is from the NLT. The sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham is the father of Canaan. From these three sons of Noah, the entire earth was populated.
Okay, so right away, what jumps out at me, and probably at you too, isn't just the list of sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth. That seems straightforward.
Yeah, just reintroducing them after the ark.
But then you get that little note, almost like a stage whisper from the narrator. Ham is the father of Canaan.
Feels significant.
It's really significant.
Yeah.
It's not just, random genealogical factoid. It's absolutely critical information. It sets the stage like a big flashing sign pointing towards what's coming next.
It does feel very deliberate. And our notes really highlight how these two verses work as a kind of literary hinge, don't they?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Gordon Wenham, in the Word Biblical Commentary series, he talks about this, how this little segment, verses 18 and 19, it just seamlessly bridges the huge flood narrative we've just finished.
Genesis 6 through 9.
Right, with the Table of Nations is coming right up in Genesis 10.
Yeah.
That clear signal,
Yeah.
We're shifting focus.
From the big universal judgment of the flood.
To the specific way post-flood humanity is going to develop and spread out. It lays the groundwork for, well, everyone.
That hinge idea is really helpful for seeing Genesis as one connected story, not just bits and pieces.
Totally. And that early mention of Canaan, right here, before Ham even does anything wrong, that's another example of how carefully this is written.
It feels like foreshadowing.
It is foreshadowing. Kenneth Matthews, in the New American Commentary, he really emphasizes this is deliberate literary anticipation. Think about it from the perspective of the original readers, the Israelites. They knew about the Canaanites. They knew about the conflicts.
So mentioning Canaan here prepares them.
Exactly. It primes them to understand why the curse, when it comes, lands on Canaan specifically, and not directly on Ham. It gives that future conflict a theological backstory right from the beginning. It makes the later narrative feel, well, coherent, almost preordained.
Wow. So not just a throwaway detail at all, a very strategic narrative move.
Excellent.
And then verse 19 just broadens the lens immediately, doesn't it, from this one family?
Boom. To the entire earth being populated by their descendants. It's a huge zoom out.
Yeah.
John Ralton, in the NIV application commentary, he points out how this universal perspective, it transforms what could seem like just a private family issue
Noah's drunkenness, Ham's reaction.
into something with global lasting consequences. It underlines that biblical theme, doesn't it? The focus on humanity's origins, how everyone's spread out. What happens in Noah's tent here, it has massive implications for all of humanity's future paths.
It really raises the stakes, a family drama playing out on a world historical stage.
Precisely. Even small personal moments in this divine story can shape the destiny of nations.
Okay, so the stage is set, the scope is global, and then the story takes this really unexpected, very human turn in verses 20 and 21. After the flood, Noah began to cultivate the ground, and he planted a vineyard. One day he drank some wine he had made, and he became drunk and lay naked inside his tent.
Yeah, it's a stark turn, isn't it? And honestly, kind of sobering. Noah, the one called the man of the soil, that's Yishama in Hebrew. The righteous guy, the one who survived the flood.
The hero of the story, really.
Right. And he plants a vineyard, drinks the wine, gets drunk, and ends up naked and vulnerable in his tent. That title, man of the soil, is doing a lot of work there.
More than just saying he's a farmer.
Oh, much more. It immediately connects him back to Adam, who was told to work the ground after Eden.
And Cain, too, right? He's a farmer.
And Cain, exactly. So that phrase, Ishama, it subtly pulls in this whole recurring theme of humanity's relationship with the earth, a relationship that's got potential for blessing, for fruitfulness, but also for struggle, for toil, for well, for failure.
It's a loaded term.
It really is. Victor Hamilton in the NICOT commentary, he suggests it's not just about occupation. It signals this deep connection to the earth, echoing Adam. But it also links to the struggle, the curse on the ground after the fall.
So even after the flood, that connection to the cursed ground, or at least the struggle with it, persists.
It seems so. It's like humanity, even with this fresh start, can't quite escape the consequences, the challenges tied to the earth and our own choices.
Which leads into that idea of this being like a second fall, a mini fall.
That's exactly how many scholars see it. Alan Ross, in the Cornerstone commentary, he argues very convincingly that the narrator is deliberately structuring this to parallel the Eden story.
How so?
Well, think about it. Adam and Eve had the forbidden fruit, leading to disobedience, nakedness, shame.
Right.
Noah has the fruit of the vine, wine. Overindulgence leads to nakedness and humiliation.
Wow, the parallel is strong.
It's incredibly strong. And Ross argues it illustrates this profound theological point. The flood cleansed the earth, but it didn't cleanse the human heart of sin.
So the inclination towards sin is still there, even in righteous Noah, even in the new world.
Exactly. It highlights our enduring vulnerability. It's a stark reminder that the core problem wasn't just external corruption. It's something deeper, internal, that persists even after God hits the reset button.
Yeah, that's quite humbling. And the nakedness itself, like in Eden, it's more than just being unclothed, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's carrying much heavier symbolic weight here. Close Westerman, in his commentary, he points out it's not just physical exposure.
It's about vulnerability, shame.
Exactly. Vulnerability, loss of dignity, deep shame. It mirrors exactly what Adam and Eve felt. Westerman suggests the story isn't really trying to paint Noah as this terrible sinner here, but more to show something fundamental about being human. That even after God saves us, even after a fresh start, we're still fragile. We're still susceptible to the negative side of things, even things that seem like progress, like making wine. It's a constant tension.
Okay, so Noah is in this incredibly vulnerable state, and the story pivots now to how his sons react. This is really the core of the incident, starting with Ham in verse 22. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and went outside and told his two brothers. Then Shem and Japheth took a blanket, laid it across their shoulders, and walked backward into the tent to cover their father. As they did this, they looked the other way so they would not see him naked.
Wow. The contrast couldn't be more stark, could it?
It's immediate.
Ham's reaction. He sees Weir, and then he tells Weyaga. Two quick actions.
See and tell?
Then Shem and Japheth. Their response is completely different. It's marked by reverence, by intention. They take a garment, they lay it on their shoulders, they walk backward, they cover him, all without looking.
Every step seems deliberate.
It does, and that difference tells us so much about their character, doesn't it? About respect, dignity.
So let's dig into Ham's actions first. The seeing and telling. Our notes suggest seeing nakedness in the Old Testament often means more than just accidentally glancing.
That's right. Kenneth Matthews points this out again. The phrase gala erwa, seeing nakedness, especially in contexts like Leviticus 18, it often carries connotations of, well, impropriety, a contemptuous gaze, a violation of boundaries, sometimes even sexual undertones, though that's probably not the primary meaning here.
So it wasn't just an innocent look.
Probably not. It implies a deliberate looking, maybe even a mocking gaze, something that actively violates his father's dignity, exploits his vulnerability.
And then the telling. It wasn't just casual chat.
Unlikely. Gordon Wenham makes a fascinating point about the verb weyaga, he told. He notes it's often used in Hebrew for making formal reports.
Ah, so it's more like an announcement.
It suggests it wasn't just idle gossip. It was a deliberate declaration of his father's shame, maybe even intended to undermine his authority publicly. Alan Ross even suggests it could be seen as a kind of power play.
Ham trying to usurp his father, or at least diminish him.
Exactly, by exposing his weakness, his vulnerability. It's a deeply disrespectful act against the established family order.
Okay, so against that backdrop, Shem and Japheth's actions look even more remarkable.
They really do. It's this model of filial piety, of profound respect.
The details are so specific. Taking the garment, putting it on their shoulders.
Right, sharing the burden, perhaps. Then walking backward, carefully covering him, deliberately looking away. It's like this carefully choreographed sequence of reverence.
Why walking backward?
John Sailhammer, in the Expositor's Bible Commentary, he emphasizes that's more than just practical maneuvering to avoid seeing him.
It's symbolic.
Deeply symbolic. It signifies their refusal to participate in Ham's sin of exposure. It's an active counteracting of the shame. They are intentionally preserving their father's honor and dignity.
It's a powerful ethical lesson, isn't it? About honoring parents, covering weakness instead of exposing it.
Absolutely. A stark contrast in character and response, setting up everything that follows.
All right, so after this really dramatic and frankly shameful event, Noah eventually wakes up. And his reaction, as we see in verses 24 and 25, is, well, it's striking, and for many people, quite confusing. When Noah woke up from his drunken stupor, he learned what Ham, his youngest son, had done. Then he said, "Cursed be Canaan. May he be the lowest of servants to his relatives."
Yeah, this is the crux, isn't it? And probably the most challenging part of the passage.
Hmm.
Noah curses Canaan, Ham's son, not Ham himself.
Right. Why? Why Canaan?
And he declares him the lowest of servants.
Yeah.
It's a question that's puzzled people for ages. Why this transfer? Why curse the grandson?
Our notes offer a few key explanations that scholars find reasonable.
Yes, thankfully. And understanding these helps us make sense of what seems, on the surface, quite strange. One major factor is that ancient Near Eastern concept of corporate personality.
Which is very different from our individualistic view today.
Very different. Gordon Wenham explains this really well. In that world, the family, the clan, was seen more as a collective unit. An individual's actions, their fate, their honor or shame, it all reflected on and impacted the whole group.
So cursing the son.
Cursing the son, especially the son's line, was a devastating blow to the father's future, his legacy, his honor. It struck at Ham in a really profound, lasting way, arguably more significantly than just cursing Ham himself might have. It attacks his lineage.
Ah, okay. That makes the focus on Canaan make more sense within that cultural context. It's a direct hit on Ham's future.
Precisely. Another angle is the idea of retribution, or poetic justice.
Like the punishment fitting the crime.
Exactly. Trimper Longman III talks about this as embodying the retribution principle, lex talionis. Ham brought shame on his father by exposing him.
So his son, his lineage, would endure the shame of servitude.
It's a fitting judgment in that sense. Dishonor is met with dishonor.
But there's also a strong prophetic element here too, isn't there? Especially for the original Israelite audience.
Oh, absolutely crucial. Scholars like Kenneth Matthews and Longman emphasize this isn't just Noah venting personal anger. It's presented as a prophetic pronouncement.
How so?
For the Israelites entering or living in the Promised Land, this story provided a vital theological justification for their conquest of Canaan.
Ah, okay. It answers the question, why are we supposed to displace the Canaanites?
Exactly. The text implies, because their ancestor was cursed due to this act of disrespect, and their subsequent culture became morally corrupt, forfeiting their right to the land. Remember how Nahum Sarna pointed out that early mention of Canaan back in verse 18?
Yes, setting the stage.
It directs the focus right onto Canaan, because Canaan was the nation Israel would directly encounter and displace. It gives their national mission a divine backstory.
So it's personal, it's cultural, and it's prophetic, all woven together.
It seems to be.
Yeah.
And John Walton also suggests maybe Cain himself, among Ham's sons, particularly embodied that rebellious spirit. Perhaps Noah, in his prophetic state, foresaw the deep depravity of the future Canaanite nations.
And that phrase, lowest of servants, or servant of servants, that sounds intense.
It is. It's a Hebrew way of expressing the superlative. It means the absolute lowest, most debased form of servitude. Total subjugation, complete loss of autonomy and dignity. It underscores the severity and completeness of the prophetic judgment on Canaan's descendants.
Okay, so after that heavy curse on Canaan, the tone shifts again dramatically as Noah turns to bless Shem and Japheth. Let's hear these powerful words in verses 26 and 27. Then Noah said, "May the Lord, the God of Shem, be blessed, and may Canaan be his servant. May God expand the territory of Japheth. May he live before God in the tents of Shem, and may Canaan be his servant."
The contrast is just immense, isn't it? From the curse to these blessings. And Shem's blessing is really unique.
How so? It says, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem."
Exactly. It doesn't say blessed is be Shem. It blesses God in relation to Shem. The focus immediately shifts from Shem himself to a special relationship with Yahweh, the covenant God.
So the blessing is primarily about his connection to God.
That seems to be the core of it. Then for Japheth, you get this promise of expansion, which sounds more like a direct blessing, and then that really intriguing phrase, he will dwell in the tents of Shem.
Let's unpack Shem's blessing first, that focus on the Lord, the God of Shem. What's the significance of phrasing it that way?
It's quite profound. Nahum Sarna highlights this specific phrasing as really unique in the Bible. It suggests Shem's greatest privilege, His ultimate blessing isn't material wealth or power, but his special covenantal relationship with God himself.
And this sets the stage
For the entire redemptive line, from Shem comes Abraham, then Isaac, Jacob, the nation of Israel, the people through whom God will reveal himself and bring salvation to the world. This blessing establishes the theological foundation for the covenant people. It's about carrying God's name and purpose.
Wow. Okay, now what about Japheth? Expansion and dwelling in Shem's tense. There's wordplay there too, isn't there?
Yes, a classic Hebrew wordplay. His name, Yapu, sounds just like the verb yap, which means may he enlarge or expand.
So God will enlarge Japheth.
Right. Gordon Wenham discusses this, noting the primary meaning is definitely expansion. Think of the vast geographical spread of the Indo-European peoples, often traced back to Japheth.
But the really fascinating part is dwelling in the tents of Shem. What does that mean? It sounds like more than just being neighbors.
It absolutely is. This is probably the richest phrase in the whole prophecy, theologically speaking. Kenneth Matthews gives a great analysis of its layers. Historically, maybe it meant physical proximity, or even Japheth's descendants sometimes ruling over Shem's lands.
But the deeper meaning.
The deeper ultimate theological fulfillment points towards the inclusion of the Gentiles, who are seen as descendants of Japheth, into the spiritual blessings and the covenant community of God.
Which comes through Shem's line, through Israel, and ultimately Christ.
Precisely. This is a foundational Old Testament hint, way back here in Genesis 9, of God's plan for universal salvation. It foreshadows the breaking down of the wall between Jew and Gentile that Paul talks about so much.
Like in Ephesians 2, where Gentiles are called fellow citizens and members of God's household.
Exactly that passage. It's remarkable. Bruce Waltke emphasizes that tents here symbolize more than just shelter. They represent security, blessing, community, shared life. So Japheth will share in the spiritual inheritance and community life that originates with Shem. It's an early glimpse of the gospel going global.
And you mentioned a literary structure here too, a chiasm.
Yes, John Sailhammer suggests this prophecy, based on Vito 25:27, might have a chiastic structure, like ABCCBA. The center, C and C, focuses on the relationship with God, Shem, and the community, Japheth, with Shem.
What does that structure highlight?
It beautifully contrasts the types of blessings. Shem gets a direct vertical relationship with God. Japheth gets blessed horizontally by joining Shem's community, by dwelling in his tents. It subtly prefigures Israel's role as the priest to the nations, the pathway through which others come to God. It's really elegant.
Okay, so after all that drama, the curses, the blessings, the prophecies, we get verse 28, which feels almost like an anticlimax, a very brief conclusion to Noah's long life. Noah lived another 350 years after the Great Flood.
Yeah, it's very simple, isn't it? Just states the fact. But it does important work. It brings a kind of quiet closure to this intense episode.
A reminder that life went on even after all that.
Exactly. Life goes on even after huge, world-changing events like the flood and this family crisis. And narratively, it acts as a bridge, preparing us for the next major section, the spread of humanity.
Our notes call it a transitional verse.
That's a perfect description. Victor Hamilton identifies it primarily as transitional. It wraps up Noah's personal story, but more importantly, it sets the stage for the big picture in Genesis 10, the Table of Nations.
So shifting from the individual patriarch to the emergence of peoples.
Precisely, from the one to the many.
And thinking about it, 350 years is a very long time. Noah would have seen some of his prophecies start to unfold, wouldn't he?
That's a great point John Walton makes. Despite the crisis, life continued for Noah for centuries. He would have lived long enough to see the beginnings of the fulfillment of his words about his son's descendants.
Which would reinforce the prophetic nature of what he said.
It would. It shows his words weren't just spoken in the heat of the moment, but had lasting divine weight. And it also gives the narrative a moment to breathe, a pause before launching into the grand sweep of the Table of Nations, a chance to reflect on what just happened. #tag deep dive into scholars' unique insights, overlooked points.
That passage truly packs a punch, doesn't it? But beyond the surface details we've covered, our study note reveals even deeper layers, some really fascinating aha moments from scholars that kind of challenge how we might usually read this and offer fresh perspectives, maybe even from ministry. Let's explore some of those more unique insights.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some really thought-provoking points in the notes that often get overlooked. For instance, Alan Ross's take on Noah as a kind of second Adam experiencing a microfall.
We touched on that briefly, the parallels to Eden.
Right, but Ross really develops it. He draws these precise lines. Adam was told to till the ground. Noah becomes the man of the soil. Eden had the forbidden fruit. Noah has the fruit of the vine. Adam and Eve's sin led to nakedness and shame.
Just like Noah's drinking led to his nakedness and humiliation.
Exactly. Ross argues the author deliberately structures it this way to make a huge theological point. The flood cleansed the earth, yes, but it didn't and couldn't wash away the sin embedded in the human heart.
So it's a deliberate literary echo to show sin's persistence.
That's his argument. It underscores this profound truth that human history, even after a divine reset, is fundamentally this cycle of falling and needing redemption. It shows why just restarting wasn't enough. Something more fundamental needed to change in the human heart itself. It really sets the stage for the rest of the biblical story, the ongoing struggle.
That's powerful. Okay, what's another insight that stands out?
Well, Sandra Richter, in her book The Epic of Eden, offers a fascinating perspective on Ham's specific act of seeing his father's nakedness. She looks at it through the lens of the ancient Near Eastern worldview.
How does that change things?
She argues that in that ancient context, a parent's procreative ability, their sexuality, was seen as almost sacred, a reflection of God's own creative power. So for Ham to see his father's nakedness, especially disrespectfully,
It wasn't just rude.
it was more than rude. Richter calls it a desecrating gaze, almost an anti-creation act. It mocked the very source of life, of lineage, of the family's future.
Wow, that elevates the seriousness massively. It connects it right back to creation and the sacredness of life.
Precisely. And it helps explain why the consequence, the curse, targets his offspring, Canaan. His offense wasn't just personal disrespect. It struck at the sanctity of life's transmission, the sacredness of human reproduction, which mirrored God's own life-giving power. It adds this cosmic theological dimension to what could look like just a family argument.
That really changes the perspective. Okay, another point.
There's the consistent emphasis from scholars like Bill Arnold in the New Cambridge Bible Commentary that this passage isn't just an isolated family story. It has a profound purpose for the original Israelite readers.
We talked about the justification for conquering Canaan.
Right. But it's even broader. Arnold highlights this as fundamentally a national origins narrative.
Yeah.
It gave the Israelites a framework for understanding their own identity and mission.
Answering questions like, who are we and why us?
Exactly. Why are we meant to conquer the Canaanites? Because their ancestor was cursed, their culture became corrupt. What's Israel's unique status? We are the line of Shem, the people with that special relationship with Yahweh.
And it also shaped how they saw other nations.
Yes. It showed that other nations, like Japheth's descendants, could also receive blessings, but their ultimate hope, their fullest blessing, lay in being integrated into Shem's tents, sharing in the spiritual covenant unique to Israel. This narrative was incredibly foundational for early Israel's self-understanding in God's big plan.
Okay, this next point feels incredibly important, especially for pastors and teachers today. The misuse of this passage.
Oh, absolutely vital. We have to address this. This passage, Genesis 9:25-27, has been tragically and horrifically misused throughout history, especially to justify racism and the enslavement of African people.
The so-called curse of Ham.
Exactly. And scholars like Kenneth Matthews and virtually all reputable commentators today are absolutely unequivocal. Any attempt to use this passage to support racism or slavery is a severe, malicious, and completely unfounded misinterpretation.
What's the key error in that misreading?
The text explicitly curses Canaan, who was just one of Ham's sons. Ham had other sons, Cush, associated with Northeast Africa, Mizraim, which is Egypt. These lines are not included in the curse.
So the curse is specific, limited to Canaan, and contextually about his relationship to his relatives, Shem and Japheth's descendants.
Precisely. It was a theological, historical explanation within the narrative world of Genesis for the later subjugation of the Canaanite peoples by the Israelites and other empires. It has zero biblical basis for justifying prejudice, discrimination, or oppression against any race or ethnic group today, particularly people of African descent. It's a painful example of how Scripture can be twisted to justify evil, and a powerful reminder for us to handle the text ethically and responsibly.
A crucial clarification. Okay, maybe one more insight.
Let's go back to Noah as the man of the soil, the Ishama. Klaus Westermann adds some interesting cultural nuance here.
Beyond just linking him to Adam and Cain.
Yes. He points out how that connection to the Adama, the ground, carries this complex resonance. The ground is the source of God's blessing, food, sustenance. But it's also the place of human toil, struggle, stained by sin since Adam and Cain.
A dual nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the wine itself reflects this too. Noah is the first vintner in the Bible. Wine in the ancient world and still today can symbolize joy, celebration, abundance, a gift.
But as we see with Noah,
It can also lead to loss of control, shame, broken relationships, disruption. Westerman suggests this highlights an inherent tension in human culture itself, between our ingenuity, our progress, and our vulnerability to misusing those very advancements, our susceptibility to sin. It's a tension we still live with, isn't it? How do we steward the good things of culture without falling prey to their potential downsides?
wow, this deep dive has really peeled back so many layers. It's far more than just a story about Noah getting drunk. Now let's bring it home. How do these ancient narratives, these intricate details and theological currents speak to us today? Especially as pastors, as leaders, as believers living in the 21st century. What are the core teachings, the really vital pastoral revelations we can draw from this family crisis?
That's the crucial step, isn't it, making that connection? And I think the first, most unavoidable takeaway is the sheer pervasiveness and destructive power of sin.
Even in the life of someone called righteous.
Exactly. Even Noah, described as righteous and blameless, stumbles. Victor Hamilton emphasizes this point. Noah's lapse shows that even great spiritual figures, people who've walked faithfully with God, can fall in seemingly mundane areas of life.
It's a profound call to humility for everyone then. No one is beyond stumbling.
Absolutely. Constant humility, constant vigilance, recognizing our own susceptibility. And then look at Ham's actions. They show how sin isn't just a private matter. It's contagious. It's destructive.
His choice to see and tell immediately fractured the family.
And led to consequences lasting generations. For us, especially in ministry, this is a huge warning. How careful must we be when we encounter the weaknesses, the failings, the nakedness of others?
Avoiding gossip, avoiding spreading shame.
Absolutely. Recognizing the immense damage it can inflict on individuals, on families, on the entire church community, our calling is always to build up, to restore, not to join in the tearing down.
Which leads right into the positive example, Shem and Japheth. Their actions provide such a beautiful countermodel for us.
A truly beautiful model. Gordon Wenham highlights how they actively worked to maintain family honor, to cover the offense. It perfectly embodies Proverbs 10.1 when, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses.
So covering isn't ignoring sin, but responding in love.
Precisely. When we see a brother or sister stumble, when we encounter weakness or failure in our churches, in our families, our first instinct shouldn't be judgment or exposure or even morbid curiosity. It should be an act of love to cover, to protect their dignity, to seek restoration.
How does that look, practically?
It means approaching the person or the situation with grace, aiming for genuine repentance and healing, but doing so in a way that respects their inherent worth and promotes reconciliation, not public shaming. It's like Shem and Japheth bringing that garment of love to cover the shame.
That's a powerful image for pastoral care. Another key takeaway.
The importance of honoring authority and biblical family ethics. Ham's core sin was contempt for his father, a subversion of that God-ordained order.
So it's a timeless lesson about respect within the family and community.
It really is. Bruce Waltke emphasizes this point. The narrative strongly reinforces the significance of honoring parents, and by extension, respecting leaders and authorities. Again, this isn't about blind obedience or never addressing wrongdoing.
What about the attitude, the approach?
Exactly. Maintaining an attitude of reverence, acting in ways that preserve dignity, even when correction or confrontation is necessary. The New Testament picks this up strongly, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think Ephesians 5 and 6 family ethics are presented as a crucial part of our Christian witness.
How we live together in household of faith demonstrates the gospel.
Powerfully so. A church that models mutual respect, love, and appropriate honor internally has a much stronger witness to a world starving for healthy relationships.
Okay, and one more core teaching. This passage also seems to point towards God's bigger plan.
Yes, absolutely. Even amidst the human messiness, Noah's prophecies unveil God's sovereign, overarching plan. There's specific election, isn't there? The blessing focuses on Shem's line, the line through which the Messiah will come. That signifies a special covenant relationship.
But it's not exclusive.
Not ultimately. That's the beauty of Japheth's blessing. Dwelling in the tents of Shem. As Kenneth Matthews sees it, this opens the door wide for Gentile inclusion. It's one of the earliest Old Testament hints of God's universal missionary heart.
That God's plan was always bigger than just one nation.
Always global.
Yeah.
From the very beginning. And for us today, as believers, many of us Gentiles, we are the inheritors of that promise. We are dwelling in the tents of Shem through faith in Jesus Christ, the descendant of Shem.
That realization should lead to gratitude.
Immense gratitude for the grace that brought us in. And it should also fuel our mission, right? to carry the same blessing, this good news, to every nation, every people group. Understanding God's redemptive plan has always been wonderfully grand and inclusive. #tag summary.
What a truly rich and honestly challenging passage we've explored today in Genesis 9.1828. It starts seemingly simple, but it opens up into this microcosm of humanity's ongoing struggle with sin, doesn't it? Echoing Eden, even after the flood.
It really does. But amidst that brokenness, that human failure, we also see these enduring principles shine through. Respect, the beauty of covering and restoration, and crucially, the steady unfolding of God's magnificent redemptive plan.
Yeah, a plan that sets the stage for the lineage of salvation and ultimately embraces all peoples. It's a powerful testament, isn't it? That even in our failures, even in those dark moments, God's purposes keep moving forward. He's always working. #faith reflection, pastoral perspective. So as we reflect on this, especially maybe for those of us in ministry, pastors, leaders, what does this passage challenge us to really examine in our own hearts, in our ministries, in the way we build community? Particularly, how do we respond when we inevitably encounter sin and weakness, the nakedness within our spiritual families?
That is such a critical question for self-examination, isn't it? This story really holds up a mirror. It forces us to confront our gut reactions when we see vulnerability or shame or actual sin in those around us, people we lead, people we serve alongside, even our own families. What's our default setting? Do we lean towards Ham? Maybe not overtly, but perhaps through subtle judgment, gossip, quickly sharing prayer requests that maybe cross a line, or just standing back and watching? Or do we consciously, intentionally choose the path of Shem and Japheth? Do we actively step forward to cover, to protect dignity, to work towards restoration, even when it's awkward or messy or costs us something? True pastoral care, this passage reminds us, often means stepping into those uncomfortable places, not shying away. It means doing so with grace, with intentionality, trying to mirror God's own restorative heart for his children. It's about fighting the temptation to judge or expose, and instead working hard to cultivate a church culture where vulnerability doesn't lead to further shame, but to genuine healing and reconciliation. It's about being guardians of dignity, ultimately reflecting the love of Christ who covers our deepest shame.